Welcome back, everyone. Up next, we'll take a look at open banking. Open banking has been roughly half a decade in the making. It's unlocking a wave of digital financial innovation and likely disruption. Our next Tech Talk uncovers the evolution of open banking around the world and what to expect in Latin America and the Caribbean. Please welcome Executive Advisor, Payment Innovation Strategy, Michael Salmony, in conversation with Executive Vice President of New Payment Platforms for Mastercard Latin America and the Caribbean, Carlos Pontes.
Thank you, Nova. In this session, we're going to talk about open banking. This is a very hot topic being discussed in many, many markets around the world. And specifically in our region, where Brazil is taking the lead with a very, very fast implementation of that concept in the market. So to talk about this, we have the pleasure to have Michael Salmony. He's an expert and executive advisor of many boards, banks, and regulators around the world. So Michael, happy to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Very honored to be here to talk to you about this super exciting topic, which is sweeping the world and changing banking everywhere.
Very good, very good. So before we go to the first question, can you help us with the definition of open banking? I think just for level set to everyone here to have an idea of what it is, what is driving it, and who is really behind this whole movement.
Open banking is a movement to allow third parties, fintechs, a totally new industry which is emerging, to put new services on top of your bank. So that basically means we're building an app store on top of a bank. So a way of thinking about it, this is a movement like from the Nokia to the smartphone. Before you just had whatever Nokia gave you, but now you have the creativity of 100,000 developers coming up with the craziest ideas you can put on top of a phone. And this is now happening in banking. So we get new people coming up with new ideas of what to do on top of banking, and I hope we'll explore some of those. But it's basically opening it up for the creativity of third parties. And this is being driven sometimes by the market, because some banks want this, and some fintechs want to build new business models. And it's sometimes being driven by regulators who say, we want more competition, we want more innovation, and we want better financial services.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. That journey's been quite long, right? We're talking about, over 5 years, but the regulation in Europe happened. Some of the attempts in the US as well. So, any surprise down the road? What's really, any insights of something that was designed to be a certain way, but it's not materializing that way? Can you share some of that? Now we've got enough time to look back and where we are on this.
Yeah, it's true. We've had open banking in Europe, who I think was the pioneer in that. For about 5 years. Actually, in a market-driven way, it's been in the US and in Germany for about 20 years, but it's really only taken off since it was given the regulatory push. And it has changed a huge number of business models. For example, lending. You can make much better credit decisions by looking at the data that somebody has on their bank accounts and deciding there whether there's a loan. And not only when you grant the loan, but also after the loan has been made, you can continue to monitor the account because you've opened this access up to third parties. And when you monitor the account, you can see somebody's stopping their charity payments. They're no longer paying the Red Cross and Greenpeace. And that, for example, is a signal that the person is in financial distress and your loan might likely default. So you get all sorts of models that nobody was expecting, just to give an example around credit.
Interesting. And even looking back, I remember discussions years back where what's going to happen to the banks? Are the banks being disrupted? Is that a competition with fintechs? What's your perspective on that? Is that proving wrong where we are today?
That's a really interesting point you raised there, Carlos, because that was one of the expectations, quite honestly, of a number of the regulators. That the fintechs would basically sandblast the banks. That was the term that was used. One fintech would attack the credits, and another one would attack insurance, another one would attack payments, and, it would blast away at the banks, one grain of sand, always taking a little bit away from the bank until there was nothing but a dead carcass left over.
Okay.
That was the anticipation some people had. And I'm glad to say it didn't turn out that way.
Okay.
It has actually turned out into a partnership model, because many banks are seeing that it is actually good to partner with fintechs, and fintechs actually need the partnership with banks, because a fintech won't have access to customers. It typically doesn't have enough capital on its own. It doesn't have the brand. So actually the winning model is now turning out to be co-opetition, as some of us like to call it. It's sort of cooperation and competition at the same time. Yeah. But it's a much more cooperative model than that the fintechs are just blasting the banks away.
It's very interesting. And examples you want to share with the audience that
I can
taking place.
Give you a few from Europe. I mean, I've been all around the world now because open banking is happening everywhere, which is hugely exciting. But maybe the most maturity is in Europe. And we saw, for example, Crédit Agricole already built an app store even before open banking was mandatory. So they just published APIs so that third parties could access bank resources, could connect to bank accounts, look at data, initiate payments, only if the consumer consents, of course, right? We could access a bank, and invited developers in to come up with crazy new applications on top of a bank. And that has made Crédit Agricole much more valuable because it has now all these great services. Another one, if you're asking, for example, is Nordea. They have over 1,000 fintechs, which they are nurturing. So they have a whole stable of fintechs to generate new value-added services to make their bank more attractive and more differentiating to others. BBVA is another one. There are several of those who've really embraced this thing, and all the smart banks are seeing this totally as an opportunity.
That's fascinating. So we don't need to wait for regulation, right? That's you can tell that if there is a portion that is driving this for market reasons to deploy and evolve, I think that's something that can probably link to my next question, which is what to look for right now, and what is next, and maybe what is the immediate step that banks can take in the region, considering that we have a very interesting case moving fast in Brazil right now.
There are a number of questions, very good questions you raised there. Just to unpack those a little bit. Yes, I think it's true that in some regions there was a regulatory push that was needed to make them all move. For example, in Europe, all banks were mandated, and this is also now happening in Turkey and in various others. Some are more cooperative by nature. For example, in Japan, it is encouraged that Japan banks please take part in this. So there's some cultural elements in there. But basically, everybody's moving in there either through own realization that this is a fantastic opportunity because they want to build the smartphone of financial services, or with a little bit of push. I may actually note on that, even America, which has been traditionally pretty resistant to the government telling industry what to do, Biden recently published an executive order where he said, I want more competition between banks. I want them to open up. I want data sharing. He's basically mandating open banking as well. So even in America. Because you raised a very good question, what should one do now, right? Given that this phenomenon is happening and it is coming. I mean, one thing is clearly that everybody needs to get their head around this, right? And that's why I spend a lot of time with regulators, with large corporates, with large banks, developing strategies of how to make this thing work, right? Because there are just some great things you can do, and some business models have really succeeded, and some things didn't work so well, and it's good to know what worked and what didn't. So everybody just has to get their head around that. That's clearly a no-brainer. The more challenging task is now to move the whole industry forward in this topic, because this touches merchants, this touches fintechs, this touches banks, this touches regulators, this touches a number of players. And we've all got to move together. So we're going to need some industries who will help us in this, who are good at franchises, at schemes, good at connecting the dots. We need fraud defense. We need dispute management. We need refunds schemes. We need hubs. We need brands. We need a governance model. And there's one name which does spring to mind, which is very good at this. I know Mastercard have been super smart at already putting lots of pieces in place to make open banking happening with some of their strategic components.
You're saying that goes beyond technology, right, Michael? That's the ability to run a franchise and broker different interests to drive cooperation and then develop an industry. That's kind of I'm trying to summarize in a way where you're saying here, which is quite important.
That's a very good summary, absolutely. I mean, technology, there are plenty of technology plays around. I used to be a computer scientist. I studied computer science at Cambridge 100 years ago, but I've turned into a business person, and I think that's, of course, where the difficult things lie and where the interesting things lie, and where you make the new world happen.
Michael, very interesting. And I'm very curious about more surprises. In 5 years, you probably learned a lot, and I wanted the audience to get a chance to see what you're collecting around the world on the learnings that probably should be thought out, like on this one anymore. That one was very fascinating between banks and fintechs.
Okay, if you challenge me to give you a few more surprises, I will gladly oblige. I mean, one, just to build on that, I already mentioned there's now a cooperation between fintechs and banks. One of the surprises is that in Europe, most of the fintechs are actually banks. They're not actually two guys in a garage with a dog with a clever finance idea. It is actually a number of banks that are now accessing, for example, if a customer has an account at several other banks, right? He has his credit card in one bank, he has his mortgage in one, and he has his salary account there. Open banking allows an innovative bank to go to all the customers' banks and say, oh, I see you've got all these bits and pieces all over the place. Why don't you bring it all to me? I'll give you a holistic offer. You'll be much better off. I'll be much better off. Because open banking allows you to look into other accounts. It allows you to provide a holistic offer. So this is one typical thing that banks are doing. And that's one example of why a number of fintechs are banks. Another surprise is, the regulator was always talking about the consumer. He should get a better experience, more competition. Actually, most of the fintechs are now B2B, which is a surprise. But if you think about it, that's where the money is. So that's maybe another surprise. And just to give you a third final one, we did a hackathon recently where we invited these creative people to come up with ideas of what you can do on top of a bank and how you could use the data in a bank. And the winner was actually a dating site. Because it said, when people meet nowadays online via dating sites, they don't meet in bars and at work and via relatives, they meet online. But people lie on dating sites. They say they're very wealthy and they travel all over the place and they're a member of Greenpeace. But your bank details will actually reveal what you're really interested in, whether you really are a high earner, whether you really are a Greenpeace supporter. And there is a market, apparently. That's what this one of the largest dating sites in the world actually said. There is a market for people to say, okay, I will reveal a bit of truth about me if somebody else will also reveal truth about them. And then you can do a matching which really works rather than on the lies that are posted. So that's a surprise. Maybe I don't think anybody was, the regulator was probably not thinking of that when they passed the regulation.
Right. It's interesting. You're talking about the actual use cases in real life, right? So the B2B being there, or maybe a data site application like that one. That's quite interesting.
Absolutely. And that's the key. I mean, this is why open banking, it sounds a bit technical. It sounds a bit like banking. It is going to go into all parts of our life. Because the data you have in your bank account, which can now be accessed by fintechs, if you consent, it can be used for so many things.
And I guess as far as the maturity, and you talked about some opportunities on the learnings that we have, the lessons learned. One I'm curious about, what about regulators? Are they learning what they learned through that journey that will take place as other regulators will look in other markets?
Yeah, that's a dimension that's often overlooked, absolutely, because everybody's talking about how banks are learning to adapt to this and how insurance is, but actually the regulator themselves are having to learn. I mean, the most crass example is they are used to talking to banks and giving licenses to banks and auditing them, and there's a huge compliance department they will talk to, and these are processes that take months. Now suddenly there's this fintech, which is two guys and a dog, who live in a garage, who come in, who have this fantastic fintech idea and want to get a license to access bank data. So this is totally new for regulators as well, that they suddenly have to deal with these very innovative, potentially very small companies who, of course, demand much quicker turnaround times and don't want to submit audit reports for 6 months, but want to hit the market in a week or two. And that's maybe differentiates some of the better regulators from others, and also some of the better fintechs. Because the more mature fintechs, some of them are called scale-ups rather than startups. They will also have a lot of experience of how to deal with regulators, and they will have a larger crew. They will also have some compliance people. They are much more mature in this thing. So both sides are getting more mature and understanding each other, and I think that's where we need to get to.
It's very good. Excellent. So let me pose a question here. What is after open banking? Is that open banking the beginning of everything, of something much bigger, or is that an end game? And like building on your examples right now, Mike, was quite fascinating.
That is a very astute observation. Yeah, I think open banking is just the beginning of a much larger development. At the moment, we have open banking, which means you can initiate a payment, you can look at account data, but the next thing is we're going to get open finance. So also all the other financial products will be transformed like this. It's not going to be stayed payments. And the next thing is going to be all industries will be opening up. It's not just going to be banking. We're already seeing that in Australia, for example, with the consumer data rights. They already, right from the beginning, said, we want to open banks and telcos and health and government. So they're already opening up several different industries. And then you can mash them up together to provide totally new services which go well beyond financial services. But banks, of course, play a key role because they have a lot of very good data. They do payments, they do banking, but they will be part of a much larger development. And this is the beginning of what we're seeing now.
Michael, let's expand. You mentioned about this branching off to different like segments and verticals. How does that, is that through finance, data expanding to connect to other industries? Can you provide some use cases on this? How do you see that happening?
Okay, yes, maybe that did sound a bit abstract, so I'll try and make that a bit more concrete. I mean, what is going to happen is that you can access the data from health records, from your smart meter, from your government, from everything, right? Not just from your bank, and these will get mashed up, right, into a new service. I mean, for example, Uber. If you think of Uber, Uber uses 4 APIs or 4 data sources. It uses your location, the driver's location, it uses the map, and it uses a payment. Those 4 services or APIs are mashed up together to create Uber. So just with connecting 4 different data sources together, you've suddenly created a whole new industry called Uber. So that's just one example of what's going to happen. And when you start opening all industries, right, not just your location, but all the other things, the sky is the limit of the new possibilities that are going to happen.
So very interesting, very interesting.
We call that sometimes embedded finance because you are embedding your payments or your data from a bank into another service. For example, there's a bicycle rental platform in Belgium who you want to pay for the rentals, so there's a bank payment button in there. You may also want to insure the bicycle, so there's an insurance button. You may want to buy the bicycle afterwards, so there's a financing button. So you're embedding your financial services in a bicycle rental platform. And this is what's going to be happening everywhere. All these platforms and these new digital services will need financial services, and banks can embed themselves in them.
Guess we're approaching the end of our session, and it was, Michael, great to have you. What a fantastic chat. I learned so much with you today. So appreciate that. So, Inova, back to you.